Welcome to the 12 Hike Podcast, where we talk about all the ways you can get outdoors. This is Zach Jenkins. Thanks for listening. Every year, for as long as I can remember, my family took great pride in our gardening abilities. Every year we'd plant acres of corn, green beans, tomatoes, you name it, we probably planted it. Then we spent all spring nurturing that garden, babying that garden. We plucked its weeds, we kept bugs out of it, we kept everything in nice neat rows, and then sometime in the middle of summer, everything would be ready at once. We'd have corn to pick. We'd be on our hands and knees twisting green bean vines to get big pods of green beans. We'd be turning over potato plants and sticking our hands in the dirt and mud pulling out potatoes. We loved every second of it. It was hard work, but we yearned for that time of year where we could have fresh vegetables for every meal. It got to the point where we were almost sick of eating fresh corn and fresh green beans and fresh tomatoes. But sure as the world, the next summer, we'd be doing the same thing all over again. And it's funny because every year we would vow to ourselves, we're not planting that big of a garden again. It's too much stuff. We don't need that much stuff. And every year it was always the same size. It was fun, but it was work. And looking back, I miss it, but I'm kind of glad I don't have to do it anymore. So it kind of amazed me whenever I was flipping through Facebook, as I tend to do, and I ran across a place called Willow Witt Ranch, and they were promoting something called agrotourism. I'd never heard of that term. I didn't know what it was, so I had to look it up. And sure enough, it's a business where people pay to come and garden. A vacation where you have a hoe in your hand and you're cutting Johnson grass out of corn. It didn't compute to me. I didn't get it. So I had to contact them and find out what it was all about. And Suzanne and Lanita were kind enough to join the podcast along with Alex and Daniel, two of their coworkers. And it was a very enlightening experience because they take great pride in their ranch. They've restored wetlands. They've restored forest areas. They've got brand new critters coming to their ranch that have never been there before. It just goes to show what the power of two people and their willingness to take care of their property can do for an area.
Okay. Chewbacca.
Now I can start recording. Suzanne, Lanita, how are you today?
We are fine.
Oh, yay, you're on here.
Yeah, but I always expect some visual response, like Zoom. So we're not going to see you, eh?
No, honestly, I've been using Zoom a little bit here lately, but I feel like the audio quality from this program is much better. The podcast is all audio anyway. I upload stuff to YouTube, but it doesn't get nearly the exposure as my podcast does. So I've just started using this medium.
Sure, sounds great. Not in my business book of tricks. Not in my bailiwick.
Thank you for coming on to the podcast. I really appreciate it. I know we had it scheduled earlier, but man, it's been a crazy summer.
Yes, it really has. Those fires in our area were crazy, and I know you're in Colorado, and there was some crazy fires there as well.
Yeah, they've actually got an evacuation order for about 20 miles west of where we live.
Oh, no. When did that start?
Yeah, today.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's getting worse. I think it's officially the largest wildfire in Colorado history.
Oh, wow.
That's horrible.
Yeah, ever since my wife and I moved here, it's been records. The first winter we were here, they had a record snowfall, and now we have record wildfires. I don't think we're good for Colorado. Okay, let's go ahead and introduce everybody. I've been talking to Daniel and Alex, so let's start with them. Daniel, Alex, go ahead and introduce yourselves.
My name's Daniel Collet, and I work at Willow Witt Ranch, as well as the Crest at Willow Witt, our associated nonprofit.
And how did you get involved with Willow Witt?
I got involved there about almost 3 years ago. Kind of started off as a farmhand. I have a degree in environmental studies, and I moved back to the area after moving away for a little bit post college graduation. And I was looking for a job and found the place, and it was perfect fit.
Nice. Alex, how about you?
My name's Alex Costello, and I got hired to work at the ranch a few months ago. The beginning of July is when I started, and a friend of mine, she did AmeriCorps last summer, and she is good friends with Suzanne and Lanita both. And she introduced me to them because they needed someone to help them with their social media marketing and their wedding and special events coordination. So I've had the pleasure of helping with that these last few months. And it's really great because my degree was in marketing. So I was very happy to graduate and be using that right away and do such fulfilling work with them.
That's a very lucky circumstance. A lot of people, when they get out of college, they don't have a job kind of plopped into their lap. That's great.
Yeah, it is really, I'm very grateful, especially because the ranch and the crest are doing really great work, and it's local, and there's a lot of education that goes into every aspect of it. So I'm happy to not just be marketing for an organization, but an organization that has the same values that I have.
Well, Suzanne, Lanita, it's not that the ranch is just a beautiful place. I was interested in it because of what you've kind of turned the place into.
Yeah.
So I know we've kind of chit-chatted back and forth. You don't have a background in conservation, outdoor recreation. You said your backgrounds were medicine. But how did you come across the ranch originally?
We actually found it. We were looking for about 40 acres. We knew we wanted to live in this area above 3,500 feet, so there's no poison oak. And a good school for our daughter, who was 10 at the time. And so we chose this community and the area around it, a little bit more elevation. And we accidentally found it as we were driving by and looked down and thought it was the most beautiful place in the world. And it was 445 acres instead of 40.
Oh boy, so you got 10 times your bargain there.
More than 10.
Why the beef with poison oak? That's kind of an odd thing to be very specific about.
I get terrible poison oak, and I have had my lifetime amount of steroids for poison oak. I just can't do it anymore.
I can sympathize. I know back in middle school, I went on a camping trip and got into some poison ivy, and I was almost crippled for 2 or 3 days because my knee swelled up, and it was a bad time.
Yeah.
The people or the person that you bought the ranch from, how long had they owned it? Do you know?
The property, 160 acres of it, had been a dairy farm since 1924, and then in about 1965, that person died and willed it to his friend Henry Lanini, and that family, Henry and his mom, put together an adjoining 160 acres, 80 acres, and 40 acres, which basically encompassed the T-shaped wetland. And they held it for approximately 10 years and sold it to a realtor. So the farm itself had a farming assessment on it, which taxes at a lower rate. So when we bought it, when the realtor bought it, if you did not have $1,000 of income, and that's not profit, but income in a year from the farm, you'd pay back taxes to the 1920s. So it was imperative that both Henry Lanini continued to run cattle up here. He didn't do the dairy. But then the realtor leased grazing to a local rancher who had 40 cow-calf pairs on the 440 acres. And then when we purchased it from the realtor, we continued that arrangement for about 15 years, a little more, for the same reason.
And the realtor had owned it about 10 years. So about 20 years, no one had lived here after the dairy guy died.
It was a little derelict, so to speak. we fell in love.
I can imagine. So from the first time you seen the place, how long did it take you to actually buy it? Was it a really quick transaction or did it take some time?
It took 2 weeks. We had planned to
2 weeks.
have it. Yes, we had planned to once we saw it. Then we found out it was for sale. Then we found out how much acreage it was, and we didn't even know it was for sale when we fell in love with it. So once we found out it was for sale, we said, well, we'll come back in 6 months and talk to you about it, because it had been on the market for 3 or 4 years. And about 12 days later, he called and said, the realtor called and said, somebody put an offer on it. You want to come look and maybe put a counter offer? So we did, and ours was higher.
And it was a real offer that they had. It was a RV company that buys rural areas for outdoor recreation and RV resorts. So we did have a true competitor for the bid.
Oh, I don't want to be down on RV parks, but it's so much better that you guys bought it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's about 200 acres. 100 acres of it is wetlands, and you couldn't have put concrete pads out for RVs on that for sure. They would sink.
Oh no, that would have been a nightmare.
Yes.
So when you first bought the property, did you have grandeur visions of this, ranch restoration and habitat restoration, or was it just kind of one of those things where you bought it and go, okay, we have it, now let's figure it out?
We really didn't have, this is Lanita, we didn't have a vision of what things should be or where we were going with it, but we just felt the desire to share it with other people. So we had a bed and breakfast at the back of the house for about 8 years. We were both in medicine, so working full-time in town. And then about 3 years into the ownership, the county asked us what our forest management plan was, and we had no idea. We thought that stewardship of the forest would be not clear-cutting it. And we hired a consultant, Marty Main, who's worked with us now for over 30 years on doing a restoration of the forest. There's an overhead map from 1969, and it looks like patches of brush. So it's been what's called high-grade logged, where they took out all the sugar pine, then all the Doug fir, and a lot of ponderosa pine, but there's a really hard clear cut in 69. So Marty's worked with us over the years. The natural regeneration was of white fir, and we had a huge percentage of white fir with white fir mistletoe. And we've worked over the years to restore a multi-species, multi-age forest. How did that plan go into effect? Did Marty come up with, did he have to do research on what the domestic species of trees were there? Did he have to submit that plan? Did it have to get approved? What all did you have to do?
Marty is a wonderful forester and forest consultant. And so he did a complete inventory of the trees. We were just told it had about 1 million board feet of, quote, timber. And so he actually came out and looked at all the trees and did some measurements. And he came in and sat at our kitchen table. And we didn't know him. And he said, well, ladies, you have a really sick forest here. So we hired him to advise us and do a forest management plan. We got a cost share, so we paid about half the price of having him do that. And the USDA actually at that point paid the other half. Now the Department of Forestry pays the other half if you're rewriting your forest management plan. So he had came up with pages and pages and pages of what was unhealthy, why it was unhealthy, what would need to change to make that a healthy forest, and prescriptions, they're called. And so he had prescriptions about the forest, he had prescriptions about needing to log out some of the white fir, especially the sickest, because it was just making everything sick, and keeping the other species of potentially healthy trees down. And so he did this prescription of a number of years over a 10-year. I think we did five
entries in 10 years.
5 entries in 10 years. And of course, we had to talk to the realtor was carrying the paper for us on the loan. So we had to talk to the realtor, and he said, as long as you're not selling it for saw logs, and any money you do get goes back against the principal. So we paid the principal way down by taking out really dead and dying trees, and did that over a 10-year period, and paid it way down.
Huh. Did you have to replant any trees, or was it just basically getting rid of the diseased trees?
It was mostly overstocked, so we do replant, and every time we go in and do any entry, we do replant with the species that we want, which is mostly, we plant some Doug fir, we plant mostly ponderosa. We don't do any plantations. We do totally spaced out intermittent plantings, so nothing's in rows. We don't take anything out of one area. We take a tree here and a tree there, basically. It's a very expensive way to log, but we take out the trees that we really need to take out in order to open up the forest around the bigger and better and healthier trees.
And those prescriptions have obviously been very beneficial to the forest. What about the wetlands? Did the grazing and the cattle and all those operations have an effect on those areas?
Even with the 40 cow-calf pairs being a more minimal impact on the wetlands, cows do tend to walk in a straight line, so we were constantly working with putting check dams in the eroded cow pathways. The original fences that were probably placed, who knows when, the person who leased grazing from us would repair the fence every year to keep the free-range cows from coming in and competing with us cows. But by 2000, the fences were even more decrepit, and we're surrounded on 3 sides by Bureau of Land Management, so they're grazing leases. And we had 200 or 300 head of cattle break through the fences and come in and severely overgraze the meadows, and the cows would eat the willows. And over that period of time, we witnessed severe erosion in the wetland, big straight cuts of and water down to the water table dropping lower and lower. And our meadows had normally been green into the 1st of August, and with that incursion and high impact of cows, despite all our best efforts to keep them out, the meadows were dry by the 1st of July and looked like the hills of California. So in 2005, we had the land surveyed and installed a high tensile fence to exclude cattle from the land. And in 2007, we did a wetland restoration contract
with the USDA.
Yeah. And so school children helped with planting over 15,000 native willow cuts cut from the native willows here alongside the streams, and then eventually in-stream restoration. And the result was we had continuous fresh water running off the land, and about 7 years ago, a photographer spotted a western pond turtle on our pond, and Michael Parker, who is a professor of herpetology at Southern Oregon University, has been studying them for about 4 years now, and we have the highest known elevation breeding population of the endangered western pond turtle. So we have over 70 marked turtles of varying ages. They have to be at least 5 years old before their shell is firm enough to be marked. And we have a turtle grant with 3 females and 3 males, monitored with a radio tag so we can see where they go in snowy conditions. They're very shy, so no one really knows their behavior. Certainly at this elevation with snow, where they lay their eggs, all that type of thing. So it was one of those situations where we built the wetlands and the turtles came. We asked how if somebody planted them here, and the herpetologist said nope. They smelled fresh water and they walked. So they walked their way to our pond.
That's amazing.
It is. It's wonderful.
I used to work for a general contractor, and we did water and wastewater treatment plant construction. One of the sites we worked at, or not, one of the sites we bid on anyway, in the pre-bid meeting, they made a very big deal. They brought someone down from Ohio State University. The area that the work was going to be done in was breeding grounds for some type of toad that was very specific to Southern Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And the gentleman from Ohio State was given authority to completely shut the project down at any time if he noticed that their habitat was being intruded on. It was just interesting because you don't think of something like a reptile being that important, but I guess in your guys' case, it's super special because it's something that's never been seen at that elevation, and
Yes.
It's just a great opportunity to track them.
And the other thing about the turtles is that with climate change, we've noticed a number of species that used to be at 3,000 feet. We're around 4,800 to 5,000 feet. And quail were around 3,000 feet in the oak woodlands. We now have quail up here. Mourning doves, we have now heard for years. And the pond turtle's normal elevation is around 3,000 to 3,500 feet. And when the Cascade Siskiyou Monument was expanded, it was to incorporate higher elevations so that the diversity of plants and animals could migrate upward where they need higher elevations and cooler climate. So they're just indicator species of, first of all, human impact in decreasing wetland habitat for the turtles, but also a changing climate. And a lot of the lower elevations are so much drier, and with drought years, there's less water there. And fortunately, our wetland areas are fed by aquifers that provide about 10 springs that feed into the wetland. So some areas of our wetland have continuous flow of water. As you closer to the outlet in a dry year like this, there's not much water at the outlet of our wetland, but it stayed green in multiple areas with restoring it because we've restored the plant life, birds, insects, butterflies, pollinators, all the species that require a thriving grassland and a wetland area are flourishing now, and including having multiple pairs of great gray owls. They're very secretive, and they love having wetland meadows adjoining trees from which to search and hunt and raise their young. So it's been quite incredible living here. We started some agritourism in about 2007 after being in Europe and seeing the introduction of European countries wanting their citizenry to connect with the farm and food. And agriculture is supported very differently, especially in Germany and in Spain and Italy. So we experienced that, and we started opening what used to be the bed and breakfast. We got it legally certified as a farm stay, and realizing that many people had never pulled a carrot from the ground. They didn't know what a green onion looked like. They'd never dug a potato. And they were just totally amazed that milk comes out of a goat's udder. It's not where they urinate. But the level of disconnect, yes, the level of disconnect of sources of food and thinking that everything comes out of a grocery store. Meat comes out of the processing area at the back of the store. It was an educational opportunity, and that really started guiding us to understanding that educational need about food, water, forest. Our culture has extracted with all the high-grade logging. It was very destructive to the ecosystem. Cattle, they love grass, but a wetland is really not the place for a high-impact animal. So it really, the agritourism, the experience of visiting in Europe, really opened our eyes to the need for sharing what we have experienced and observed and learned here over the last 35 years.
Yeah, and I would imagine, I mean, you guys don't have a conservation background, but it just from this brief 10 or 15 minutes, it sounds like you know more about the ecological impact that we have on our environments than a lot of people do.
Yes, we certainly learned it being here, and the longer we're here, we find we learn so much more about the land. There's something wonderful about being on a piece of property, especially a really varied piece of property for that many years, watching the seasons and the years change.
Absolutely. And, you know, the agritourism, whenever I seen that kind of caught me off guard, because where I came from, we gardened, you know, every year. That was a thing. We had acres of vegetables that we took care of. That's not a vacation for me. Having a hoe in my hand and hoeing corn, down on my hands and knees, picking green beans, pulling potatoes. I did that stuff since I was 5 years old. So when I seen agritourism, I thought, come on now, who really is so disconnected from the land that is such a big experience? But it sounds like there's more people like that than I thought there was.
I would bet 85 to 90% of Americans, amazingly, have basically, probably that's high, but have basically never gardened. And we do get quite a few people who say, yeah, I grew up on a farm. I'm going to go read a book.
This smells like
I'm
work.
going to go someplace else. This just smells like work to me. But for the rest of Americans who, and a few Europeans, who have never had that in their lives, you know, this is 2 or 3 generations now. And they're just amazed at how things grow and how nice animals are, and that a warm egg comes out of a chicken.
A cloaca.
A what?
Cloaca is the opening,
You know that.
tract from a chicken. The food goes in the mouth, the eggs and everything else come out the cloaca.
Sorry, Zach.
I had no idea what that was.
That's what that is. CLOACA.
It's not a medical term.
Where we come from, we call that the chicken's butt.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. They all come out the same place.
Yeah.
Oh boy, Daniel, when you came on, was some of this conservation, ecological stuff important to you? What's been your role in promoting that?
Yeah, it's absolutely important to me. I'd grown up in the smaller percentage of, you know, the people that Suzanne was talking about, where I grew up on a little homestead and farm and was deeply connected with nature and raised animals for 4-H, and had parents that were gardeners and naturalists and, you know, educators, and very, very in tune, and instilled in me that having a land ethic is really important. So that kind of led me into the degree I ended up choosing, which was environmental studies. So wanting to make a positive impact on the planet and society, and then hopefully land a job, you know, working in the field that I'd earned my degree in. So when I was looking for work after college, I ended up moving up to Portland from Ashland and working for an environmental restoration company, which was fun, and I learned a lot of botany, but it was kind of monotonous, and, you know, basically wandering around killing invasive species all day. So I decided to move back down to Ashland and was looking for work. And since I knew about farming, I kind of went that avenue and was searching around, and I ended up finding this place. And I'd heard about Willow Witt Ranch a little bit before, just from the farmer's market and some other things. But yeah, so I kind of started on as a farm hand, is what we call most people that start working there, and then quickly learned about the fairly new nonprofit that they had just formed a few months before I had started, and got really, really connected with kind of the whole mission of the place and everything aside from the day-to-day of milking goats and doing the chores and stuff like that.
Can you expand on the nonprofit a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, the nonprofit was formed in, I think, the beginning of 2018. So it'll be 3 years old in January. And the nonprofit is called the Crest. And the Crest kind of means two things to us. We're at the crest of the watershed. So we're actually at the crest of multiple watersheds. The very, very top of the Bear Creek watershed, which flows into the Rogue River, which is the Rogue Valley, which is where we all live. So many people know about that. And then the CREST is also an acronym, which stands for conservation. Let's see, we've changed the R. So it's reciprocity, education, stewardship, and trust. Those are all values that are laid out in the CREST's mission statement. And so the nonprofit is kind of, I see it as like a natural progression. So, Suzanne and Lanita have been here for 35 years, and they had this farm business, and then they discovered agritourism and wanted to bring people up to see this beautiful place and experience agritourism. And that in and of itself is a form of education. And they wanted more people to come up, and they had always had, the farm field trip visit. And like they said, they had school kids come up and plant willows. But they really wanted to expand the educational aspect of the farm. So they formed a nonprofit, and that allowed them and us to get grants, and to really kind of hit the ground running with education and public access as the forefront of the business, and that carrying it into the future. Also thinking of it too as kind of a succession plan for the property and the land and where they want it to go when they are no longer here.
Do you have a hand in the education aspect?
Yeah, I do. Most of us at the farm kind of do a little bit of everything. And since when I started working there, the nonprofit had just been incorporated, and so they just had a board. We're kind of just getting things started. And since I have a background in environmental studies, I kind of jumped on board helping with things, and have slowly kind of started to do more and more things. And now I'm the program coordinator. So I kind of do a lot of the day-to-day stuff. I've facilitated some of the educational programs in the past. We'll oftentimes hire counselors and teachers to actually facilitate those programs. But I have a fairly direct hand in the educational stuff.
And Suzanne, Lanita, was the educational aspect always important, that you wanted to show people what we could do to our environment to make it better? Or was that just kind of a byproduct of being there for so long and seeing the place get better and just being proud of it?
I believe it was there pretty much from the first. We really couldn't understand why we were led to buy this very large piece of property. And the minute we saw it without snow, we bought it under 4 feet of snow. And the minute we saw it without snow, we said, "Oh, we should bring people here." And it was more than the bed and breakfast. It really was. We had school kids come up from pretty early on, and one of our board members she's a retired kindergarten teacher, and I believe she'd been bringing her kindergartners up from that particular school. I think they've been coming for 20 years now. And so people asking, can I bring my school kids up to see your animals, to see the little farm you have? And it really morphed from there into studying. We had a number of years of forest day camp for kids to learn about the forest and learn about forestry, and that was quite early on. And so it's been a constant part, but it wasn't the absolute center of our farm endeavors. Actually, working in town was the center of our lives, and then we also worked up here, and then we started hiring a few people to help work up here. But we've pretty much always had people come up, especially school groups come up.
When all the school groups come up, what are some of the things that you do to give them the best idea of what the ranch is about? Do you have a select few activities, or do you kind of give them the broad brushstroke?
Very often, we'll have at least 2 classes. Sometimes it's as few as 30 students, but as many as 90 have come on a big bus from the Bay Area. And we will divide them into groups, especially the high school students that came. They really wanted to know about living off-grid. In 1985, it would have been $100,000 to bring grid electricity here, so initially we had kerosene lamps, and we moved into the solar age rather quickly. I think even in 86 we had solar panels for our radio, and by 1990 we had a full set of panels, so we had electricity in the house. That was one of their interests, but we'll do education about the natural history of the land, volcanic activity in the Cascades, the water systems in the wetland, regenerative forestry, and the animals are a highlight for almost any age group, and it includes gathering eggs. We do a tour of the garden. It varies whether, some years we've had a tasting table, and out of the class of 30 kids, 10 of them go in the garden and pick leaves, harvest leaves, and those go on a tasting table. The next group gets the roots, the carrots, the potatoes, the radishes, and the next group get the flowers, so everything from borage to herbs. And they experience making their own salad after tasting all the various products. And the parent supports will hard boil some eggs, and they have a lunch. And that's been an incredible experience for kids to taste things and have the opportunity to harvest them and explore that. So there are a lot of varieties of what they get to do. And another highlight is going on a hike with goats. We started with 2 dairy goats and moved up to 4 goats, and we have herd share dairy now. But we started backpacking with goats in about 1989. And we hand raise the babies, so they're very personable and friendly, and we sell baby goats as pack animals to hiking enthusiasts and hunters. But our goats are amazingly gentle, friendly, and it's sometimes a highlight of the kid group or other guests to go for a walk with animals in that way. It's like having a big dog with horns who doesn't use them, and they don't jump on you, and they don't push you, and so there's a lot to do here. We have a birding class almost every year. So people learning to use binoculars and doing a bird study. And then watercolor artists come up and sit and paint quietly. And so there's a lot to experience, and it keeps expanding as we now have a wetland marked trail so people can observe the turtles from a blind, so they don't disturb the turtles and the turtles don't dive for cover. They get to look at these unique animals. And we hope to have a forestry trail that teaches about different aspects, directions of a slope and what trees grow there, what the soil is like. We have oak woodland, pine forest, cedar, and then also the more diverse conifer forest. So a lot of diversity. So there's just so much that we have learned. And we've also taken classes from Oregon State University about pasture management and forestry management. So we just like that. It's so much fun to share what's right here.
A life goal of mine, I did a podcast with a lady in southern Colorado, and she has goats. I'm going to hike with a goat. I have to.
It's wonderful. They're just wonderful. They're kind of like 250-pound dogs, except they're taller. They walk slower. They don't run around. They walk with you, and they like getting touched. They eat, and the kids, as we go along, the kids get to braid the hair on their back into little braids and put flowers in it. And the goats just say, oh, scratch right there. Oh, that's good. That feels good. I like you touching me. So, we'll have 10 kids around one goat, and the goat is just in goaty heaven. You'll like it. Go for it. Do it.
I'm going to try it. And the great thing about the ranch is it's this wonderful throwback to an age before we had a lot of technology. There's been, you're right, there's such a disconnect between people and how we get things. And Alex, with you coming on board, you have to find a way to merge the two. So, just in your few months, what's been your mission as far as making sure people know about the ranch, but they understand that it's a way to get away from technology?
Right. I really like that question because really finding the balance between the two is something that over the last 6 to 7 years of my studies has been a real important aspect in my own life, because I see the value and the utmost importance of being connected to the land and how we've lost that, especially in younger generations. And then I also see the importance of having a voice, and how if you want to have that voice and exercise that voice in that muscle in the world, it's usually pretty necessary that you have a cell phone and that you have an email and that you're on social media. And with social media comes digital marketing and everything else. So, when I came across the ranch a few months ago, I, like Daniel, had heard about Willow Witt Ranch at our local farmers market, but I had never visited in person myself, and I didn't know anything about the details of the work that they truly are doing. So I was really, really dumbfounded and outstanded by the work that has gone on in both the Crest, the nonprofit, and then just Willow Witt Ranch itself in our community. And so I saw that because of the work they're doing and how valuable it is, their marketing kind of does itself. And Suzanne and I have had a laugh about that. She's explained to me how they haven't always needed a marketing agent present, and people usually just find them because of how nice their farm stays are, their agro-tourism, how they have outdoor education programs for people in our community. So word spreads, and they've had journalists do articles for them. So half of the work was done for me. And then of course you jump into something and you want to maintain it and you want to contribute to that positive reputation. So that has been what I've been striving to do these last 4 months. Definitely.
Have you tried to key in on a certain demographic and reach out to them, or is it just throwing a broad net out there and telling everybody to come?
Yeah. So in my schooling, I studied marketing, and one thing they told us is that if you're going to be successful at it, you have to have a target audience. So that's a question I asked myself the very first week that I was interviewing and getting hired there. I looked at, okay, what is their target demographic? Do they really have a narrow demographic? And the ranch really doesn't particularly. But once I was able to go through and have access to all of our social media accounts and look at our insights, I did notice that typically we're looking at like late millennials, and then definitely a few baby boomers. But that was just on the digital side of things, because when I would go to events, I would see a wide array of families, different ages. And then there's a lot of SOU students and students involved in the master program that are doing things for the Crest and the ranch. So it was kind of hard to target that demographic. And what I found to be the most successful was you can't try and target everybody in a single post. It'll never work. And so I think having 1 week where, depending on what event is going on, and what I would like to say, what's relevant in that caption, tailoring one post or a week's worth of posts towards an older group of people, and then looking at the data of that, and then the next week targeting a younger group of people, making sure that hashtags are always relevant. And all of the small stuff in marketing really, really adds up and is important, and you can't overlook those details.
I wish I knew those details, because I am absolutely dumbfounded by the hashtag game. I don't get it.
Yeah, I struggle myself. It's constantly evolving. I think that the theme of 2020 and the theme of marketing is adaptability, for sure.
It's so funny. I'll catch myself saying stuff every once in a while, and I stop and go, Jesus Christ, I sound like I'm 80 years old and I'm just a grumpy old man. I can't keep up with these young whippersnappers.
It's a lot. Sometimes it's not worth keeping up with.
This is Suzanne. I was saying that's exactly how we feel.
I'd say me and you have a lot more in common than me and Alex and Daniel.
And isn't it wonderful that there are people who know those?
Oh yeah, I've recently, not only do we do the podcast, but we do a blog, and my family every fall we do a bunch of things that they did 100 years ago. We render lard for cooking oil. We make our own apple butter outside. We still butcher animals. There's a lot of things we do that when I tell some of my peers that I'm doing these things, they go, "What? What's lard?"
Yes.
I'm a product of that environment, and just whenever I see some of the things I see on social media, I shake my head and go, that there's no point in doing those stupid things. I just don't get it. What kind of impact have the wildfires had on your guys' area? Are they close to you?
Why don't Daniel and Alex answer that?
Yeah, so I'll start a couple years back. So you could start a long ways back and talk about fire adapted landscapes, so we won't go there. The last year's fire season was pretty mellow in Oregon in general. I think we had like one really large wildfire. But the 2 years before that, the Rogue Valley especially, but much of Oregon and much of the West Coast, got pretty hammered by wildfires. And us at the ranch, while we did not have any fires in very close proximity, which is really lucky, and we're very fortunate to have not experienced that, we were inundated with smoke. So agritourism being our main thing, and having people up being our main thing, really took a hit because people don't want to go outside when they can't breathe the air. So that was really unfortunate. And then this year, up until September, basically, we were doing just fine. And the ranch itself hasn't had any impact from the wildfires around here. But I think it was September 8th, there was a wildfire that started in Ashland, which is our kind of home community. The ranch is about 20 minutes east of Ashland, up in the mountains. But Ashland is our home. And so a fire started in Ashland and quickly ripped north, burned about half of Talent and a very large portion of Phoenix. And those are both kind of small, kind of bedroom communities of Medford and Ashland. I think the overall number of structures burned was close to 3,000. Also on that day, there was other fires that started around the area, in Eagle Point, which is outside of Medford. So long story short, not a very good day, and not a very good September. So, up at the ranch, we got pretty inundated with smoke, but our main concern was all of the people and all of our friends, some of which lost everything and lost their homes. Fortunately, we don't know anybody that lost their lives, and the loss of life was actually really low considering the circumstances. But yeah, that's kind of the story on the fires. And, we have past employees that have lost their homes. I live in Talent about 4 blocks away, and we're okay, but we're incredibly lucky. If the wind had been going a different direction, it would be a different story.
Yeah, it's so scary moving from Southern Ohio. I had never experienced a wildfire season, and I've been blown away at the amount of smoke and ash in the air, and I can understand how it can get really bad really fast. Yeah,
definitely, and it's we're talking about resilience and adaptability, and it's something that takes a little getting used to. I've grown up in Oregon, and so I know about wildfires, and they've been around. But it hasn't really been until the last maybe 5 years where I've experienced, there's a season in summer where going outside is inconvenient, or we're used to wearing masks now, but need to wear a mask all the time outside because you can't breathe the air, and recreating outside is not really possible because you don't want to be wearing an N95 mask and because you can't breathe the air. So it takes a little bit of getting used to, but I think part of the thing we've talked about, and it circles back around to the sustainability aspect is this is our home and we need to take care of the planet and figure out what we can do so that this doesn't keep happening. So that leads into, climate resiliency, sustainable forest management, sustainable agriculture, and getting more people outside connected back to the land so they can help take care of it and better understand it, because climate change and poor forest management and all of these are kind of a symptom of that nature deficit that we were talking about before.
And it sounds like the principles of the ranch are pretty well established, but is there anything in the future that maybe you want to do or change that you're not doing now?
This is Suzanne. The one thing that it's not a change, it's an addition. We have opened the first new cemetery in all of Oregon in more than 50 years, and the first dedicated green burial or natural burial cemetery in Oregon. It's a permitted use in our zoning, which is a forest reserve zoning, and we could do a campground, a school, a church, a prison, or a cemetery. And we've done the campground. We have the school. Our land is the church, and we're not doing the prison. And so I'm 74, Linda is 70, and we think about cemeteries. And we started looking into it, and a friend of ours was going to be buried on her land and ended up losing her connection to her land. And so she asked if we had thought about opening a true cemetery instead of just the two of us being buried here. And so we looked into it, and I spent a couple of years doing the zoning and the Oregon Mortuary and Cemetery Board, where no one there had ever formed or licensed a new cemetery because it's been more than 50 years. So, and we also have a pet cemetery, and they're in beautiful forests. We're doing a little landscaping in the forest with lots of trails. And so that's kind of the future of a small portion, 18 acres of the land. And that's going to help keep income and support all the other things that we're doing here in the future.
You said a green burial or a green cemetery. What makes it green?
A couple of things. We have whole body burials, or we can bury cremated remains, and there's no embalming. We don't take any vaults, any concrete vaults. Most cemeteries are lawn cemeteries, the flat kind of cemetery most people know of, use concrete vaults in order to be able to mow over the top of them, and quite easily. Mm-hmm. So our graves are a little shallower because we have either the person's body is either in a shroud or in a plain pine box, pretty much, and so we don't have to have quite as deep a grave. We take out the soil in the layers that it was in the grave, and we replace it with those layers in reverse. So all the layers are intact. So the top layer is intact, and all the microbes are able to reestablish quite well once we fill up the grave. And we have just a small flagstone headstone. So it's really a much more returning to the earth rather than being put away burial.
Interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
Alex, what about you? Do you have any plans in your role for the future? What do you see happening? It's interesting that you ask that. I am still hopefully going to be around the ranch for months and years to come. I love the Southern Oregon area, and where I'm from the Bay Area of California. So being here is a much slower pace of life, and I feel very much more so connected to the land and to my community. than I did back home. And I do love visiting, but I am planning to be here, and I just got a full-time job doing project marketing management. So that's very exciting. And I'm unsure who will be filling my role at the ranch yet, but I'm hoping whoever it is, they move forward and keep the values that I've seen consistent with every team member. And I also hope that in my free time, I can continue to be involved in programs and activities with the Crest and the ranch, because I truly believe in the work that's going on here and the stewardship that's happening, and how it's inspiring a lot of young people's hearts. My friend who introduced me to Suzanne and Lanita and the team at Willow Witt Ranch, she herself is very much into land management, as well as the person who was doing their marketing before me. I worked on a documentary for a local national monument, the Cascade Siskiyou National Monument here in Southern Oregon, with her 2 years ago in my schooling. So they've had some really incredible people on and off of their team, and you don't see that at every place. So I'm very honored to have been a part of the team, even if it was for a few months.
And with COVID, have you looked into doing like virtual tours or virtual education seminars?
Yeah, I think that with how developed their website is, that's something that could easily be added on. There hasn't been a mapped out plan, which we would need for that. But a lot of universities and a lot of organizations are doing that, especially now with COVID. So I think that's something that could easily be added on to our digital services. Absolutely.
I'm out of questions. Do any of you have any closing thoughts, closing comments, things that you think maybe some listeners might need to hear moving forward, especially about conservation and just getting back to your roots with nature?
I would just like to put in a plug of becoming closer to the gifts from the earth, and that we give back to the earth in the measure that we take. And I think we've been in a mentality of all the apples are there for the eating, all the trees are there for the cutting. We've extracted far more than is sustainable, and it's quite painful to reflect on that, and how do we unlearn consumerism and the advantage that we take of resources, and how important conservation is. It's not even just recycling, but it's lowering our requirements. So I think it's a critical turning time. It's very hard with electricity and solar that you do laundry when the sun shines. It's not just there constantly. We're so used to the immediate availability of both technology and power, whether it's gasoline or electricity or whatever.
And water.
And water. And water is going to be scarce, so scarce that portions of the United States will not be inhabitable because of lack of water and agricultural production, and hunger in the United States is going to be deeper. So I just feel like we're at a critical turning point, a wake-up time.
Alex, what's the best way to reach Willow Witt Ranch?
I would say if you mean reach in the sense of contact or become involved?
Yeah, contact, be involved, see the content, see the photos, videos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say definitely going to their website, www.willowwittranch, and then the Crest has a great website, the Crest at willowwittranch.org, and that's updated regularly, as well as we're very, very active on both Facebook and Instagram. So if you want to visit any of those platforms, you can see events that are happening right now. We have a fall outdoor school that's going on this week and the following 2 weeks for our children that are 4th through 7th grade. And then we have our farm stays that people can still do through the winter. So I just was giving a tour to a local photographer this afternoon at the ranch, actually right before I signed on to here. And, we were talking, she asked me, she goes, can I stay here with my partner? Can we rent these beautiful wall tents? It's kind of like glamping, and there's 4 of them. And she goes, cause I know winter's coming, so are we pressed for time? And I go, no, if you can get up here and you go on our website, you can look at when you can reserve that. That is available to you. So there's that. And then they have a farmhouse studio as well as their meadow house, and everything runs on solar. And there's wood stoves as well for people. So, yeah, I think it's really great that you can be updated with both the ranch and their nonprofit regularly just by logging on to your phone or computer very easily.
Fantastic. If no one has anything else to add, we can go ahead and finish up. I want to thank you all for your time. I wish I was closer to Oregon, because I'd certainly come visit the ranch.
Yeah.
Well, if you're ever out here, you should swing on by.
We'd love to see you.
Trust me, I will. Well, if I don't go hiking with goats somewhere in Colorado, I've got to go to Oregon to do it.
Absolutely, you should.
I'd like to thank Suzanne, Lanita, Alex, and Daniel for joining me on the podcast. I had a lot of fun. I learned some things, and I hope you guys did too. If you want to follow us on Facebook, go to 12 Hike. We are also on Instagram at 12 Hike Challenge. Our YouTube channel is still, we're putting podcasts up there. And we also have a new web store where we're selling hats, shirts, other 12 Hike merchandise. If you enjoy what we do and you want to support us, go buy a shirt or even something like a sticker or a button. Every little bit helps.